The winter night had settled heavy over Ash Hollow, smothering the town in silence. Only the saloon lights remained alive, flickering through the cracks of the wooden walls. Inside, smoke floated thick in the air, and glasses clinked nervously as if the patrons already felt what was coming. Martha Kane, known simply as the widow of the saloon, stood behind the counter, her black dress somber and elegant despite the dust of the West. Her husband had been dead for 6 months, shot in a poker dispute that everyone whispered about, but nobody dared to describe in detail. Since then, she carried the saloon on her shoulders. Some came to drink out of loyalty, others out of pity, but most to see how long a lone woman would survive in that world. Her green eyes scanned the room as she refilled glasses. The murmur of conversations was low, and she could tell her presence made men uncomfortable, a mixture of attraction and threat. A woman alone in the West was like a flame. It illuminated and it burned. That night, a stranger crossed the saloon's threshold. His boots echoed against the floorboards with a rhythm that demanded silence. James Cutter, a man marked by dust and violence, carried the look of someone who had seen too many graves dug under the same sun. He didn't smile, didn't nod. He simply walked to the counter and ordered, "Whiskey, strong." Martha served him without ceremony. Their eyes met for a brief moment, his dark, tired eyes, hers fierce, sharp as a blade. Something unspoken passed between them, something that belonged neither to the past nor to the present. At the corner table, Rufus Dalton, a local creditor with a reputation for squeezing until there was nothing left to squeeze, let out a dry laugh. He leaned forward and called in a mocking voice, "Widow Kane, still standing behind that counter?" Thought by now the saloon would be mine. The room went quiet. Everyone knew Rufus's reach in the town. He held half the men by debt and the other half by threats. Martha clenched her jaw. "You'll have to keep waiting, Dalton. The saloon was my husband's, and now it's mine." "Yours?" Rufus grinned. "And who inherits the roof also inherits the debt." The words dropped like stones. The patrons looked away, pretending not to hear. Martha's hand trembled slightly on the counter, but she lifted her chin and held Rufus's gaze. Before the silence turned unbearable, James Cutter spoke. His voice was low, dry, like gravel on the floor. "You're making too much noise for a man with that small of a spine." Rufus turned his head slowly. "And you are?" "Just someone tired of cowards barking at women." The tension stretched like wire ready to snap. Rufus got up halfway, his hand brushing against his belt, but stopped. He wasn't a fool. James Cutter carried the air of a man who wouldn't miss. The saloon breathed again, though nobody dared to laugh. Rufus sat down, grumbling, but the threat lingered in the smoke. Martha poured another whiskey for James, sliding the glass across the counter. She didn't thank him with words, but her eyes softened for an instant. The hours crawled by in the saloon, the kind of night where the wind outside seemed to test every crack of the windows. The piano played faintly, not out of joy, but because silence was worse. Martha moved between tables, graceful and firm, though the shadow of Rufus's words still hovered in the air. James Cutter stayed at the counter, drinking slowly, his gaze wandering like someone who read danger better than most men read letters. When the clock struck 11, the doors creaked open again. 2 figures entered, silhouettes dusted in travel and secrecy. They didn't belong to Ash Hollow. Their coats were heavy, their eyes alert, the kind of men who carried silence like a weapon. One of them, tall, with a scar running down his jaw, approached the counter and dropped a small object with a thud. It was a token, round, metal, stamped with the emblem of a crescent moon. The room froze. The piano fell silent. Martha's blood ran cold. She had seen that emblem once before, in her husband's pocket, the night he was shot. The man with the scar leaned closer. "Word is this saloon still stands on Kane blood. We came to collect what was promised." Martha stared at the token, then back at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." The second man, younger but with eyes just as hard, spoke up. "Your husband owed more than coin. He owed silence. And since he can't keep it anymore, the debt falls to you." Gasps rippled through the tables. Rufus smirked in the corner, enjoying the turn of the knife. James' cutter shifted, slow but deliberate. His hand brushed the rim of his glass, but his voice carried the weight of a revolver being cocked. "She owes nothing. Not to you. Not to anyone wearing that mark." The scarred man studied him for a long second. "And you? What's your stake here, stranger?" James didn't blink. "Let's just say I don't like men who walk into a room thinking shadows make them kings." The younger man laughed, sharp and ugly. "Careful, friend. That kind of mouth gets people buried." James's eyes flicked to Martha for the briefest moment, then back to the men. His tone was calm, measured. "Then I suppose I'll choose the place of the grave myself." The words hung in the air like frost. Nobody moved. Martha's hand tightened on the counter, but her voice cut through the stillness. "If it's me you want, speak it plain. Don't poison the whole saloon with your riddles." The scarred man leaned back, his smirk as cold as the wind outside. "Plain enough, widow. What we want is what Cain died hiding. A ledger, a letter, a paper. He carried secrets. Secrets worth more than whiskey." Her heart skipped. She remembered the drawer under the old counter, the one her husband had locked the night before his death. She had never opened it since. Rufus slammed his glass down, breaking the moment. "I told you all. The saloon's not hers to keep. It belongs to the debt, to men who can pay their way." James turned his head toward him, slow as thunderclouds rolling. "Say one more word, Dalton. Just one." The saloon held its breath. Rufus swallowed whatever courage he had left and looked away. Martha steadied herself, her green eyes catching firelight. "If there's truth in what you say, then you'll have to drag it out of me, and you'll find that I don't fall as easily as my husband." The scarred man tapped the token on the counter and smiled thinly. "We'll see." He stood, signaling to the younger one. Together they left the saloon as suddenly as they had entered, leaving behind the stench of threat and a silence that felt heavier than gunpowder. The doors closed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the whispers began, voices darting like mice in the dark. Martha's hands shook, but she gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. James' cutter rose from his stool, leaving coins on the wood. He didn't look at her, not directly, but his words were for her alone. "Whatever you're carrying, widow, it's bigger than you, and it won't die quiet." Then he stepped out into the night. Martha watched him go, her breath shallow. She picked up the token, its cold metal biting her skin. She realized then that the ghosts of her husband's past had returned, and that the only choice left was whether she would face them alone, or let a stranger stand beside her. The night dragged heavy after James Cutter left. Martha tried to keep the saloon alive, pouring drinks, forcing the piano back into sound, but everyone knew the shadow of that token still lingered. When the last patron stumbled out, she bolted the doors, heart-hammering. Alone, she went to the drawer beneath the counter, the one Cain had locked the night before he died. With trembling fingers, she forced it open. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers tied with string, and at the top another token with the crescent moon. Her breath caught. Cain had been hiding it. He hadn't owed a debt. He'd been keeping something from them. She unfolded the first sheet. Numbers, names, coded marks, a ledger. Transactions that reached beyond Ash Hollow. Payments made to men she didn't know, initials she couldn't decipher. But one name stood out again and again. Brant. Her chest tightened. She remembered Cain whispering that name once long ago, after too much whiskey. A man you don't cross. A man who didn't forget. The door creaked suddenly, the latch rattling. Martha shoved the papers back and reached for the shotgun Cain had left behind the counter. The door opened slow. James Cutter stepped back inside, his coat dusted with snow, his revolver at his hip. He paused when he saw the barrel leveled at his chest. "You've got a steady hand," he said, almost admiring. Martha lowered it just slightly. "You shouldn't sneak up on people at this hour. I figured sneaking in was safer than staying out. You're not the only one being watched tonight." He sat down at a table without asking, his boots heavy against the floorboards. Martha studied him, still tense, the shotgun close. "You know them, don't you?" she asked. "The men with the tokens." James's jaw tightened. "I've crossed their path before. They don't collect debts. They collect silence. And when silence runs out, they bury what's left. Martha hesitated. Her voice came out quieter than she meant. My husband, Cain, he was part of it? James met her eyes. He was in deep, maybe deeper than you realize. Her throat burned. She turned away, poured herself a drink, though her hand shook. And now it falls on me. James didn't deny it. You've got two choices, widow. Run far and never look back, or stand and face the storm. Martha downed the whiskey in one breath. Her fingers gripped the counter like she could squeeze truth out of the wood. I've been running since the day he died. I'm tired of running. For a moment, James's gaze softened. Then he leaned back, arms crossed. Then you'll need more than whiskey and walls. You'll need people who'll stand with you. And you? She asked, sharp. His eyes flickered to the papers she thought she had hidden well. He had seen them. I'm not here for you. I'm here for what Cain left behind. But I don't much care for the men who want it either. The air between them was heavy, caught between distrust and necessity. Finally, Martha straightened her back, her voice firmer. Then sit, Mr. Cutter. If death is knocking on my saloon's door, I'd rather not answer it alone. The following evening, Ash Hollow stirred with rumors. Word had spread about the strangers with the crescent tokens, about Martha Cain standing behind the counter with fire in her eyes. Some folks whispered she'd inherited more than debt. She'd inherited danger. By sundown, the saloon was full again, not with joy, but with curiosity. Men wanted to see if trouble would come. The piano stayed quiet. No one wanted to tempt fate. Martha moved between tables, her red dress catching lantern light, her steps steady. James sat near the back, hat low, revolver never far. The doors slammed open. The scarred man from the night before walked in, his young companion at his side. The air went still, thick enough to choke on. They walked straight to the counter. The scarred man set down another token. Last chance, widow. Where's the ledger? Martha's heart pounded, but her voice didn't tremble. I burned it. A murmur rippled through the room. The scarred man narrowed his eyes. You lie. James Cutter rose slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor. His voice cut through the tension. She doesn't owe you truth. Not here. Not tonight. The younger outlaw shifted, hand brushing his holster. The saloon tensed, men inching for cover without standing. Martha leaned forward, her hand steady on the counter. If you're so desperate for Cain's ghosts, you can dig him up yourself. But this saloon isn't yours to haunt. The scarred man's jaw flexed. He looked from Martha to James, then around at the eyes watching him. He saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, but quiet defiance. The kind that spreads. He picked up the token and slipped it back into his coat. His voice was low, but sharp enough to cut. You just made yourselves enemies you won't survive. They turned and left, the doors slamming behind them. Silence held the room for a long beat. Then slowly the piano started again, soft, shaky, but enough. Martha let out the breath she'd been holding. James Cutter lowered himself back into his chair. For the first time, the room felt less like a cage and more like a choice. That night, long after the last lantern was dimmed, Martha sat at the counter staring at the empty glass in front of her. The saloon smelled of whiskey and smoke, but also of something new, resolve. James Cutter was still there, his chair tilted back against the wall, hat pulled low, though Martha knew he wasn't sleeping. His hand hovered near his revolver, always half ready, like a man born into danger and never free of it. Finally, she spoke. Why are you really here, Cutter? What do you gain from staying? James's voice came slow, like gravel shifting. I told you. Cain owed debts. Those debts left tracks. I followed them here. To me? She asked. He lifted his head just enough for his eyes to catch the lantern glow. To whatever Cain left that men are willing to kill for. Martha's hand tightened on the counter. And if I tell you there's nothing worth finding? James leaned forward, chair legs thudding to the floor. Then you've got two choices. Either you're telling the truth and they'll burn this place down anyway, just to be sure. Or you're lying, and you'll burn twice as fast. The words settled heavy between them. Martha met his gaze, refusing to flinch. Then what's your role in this, my executioner or my shield? He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until the fire in the hearth cracked, breaking it for him. Depends which one keeps me alive longer. Martha almost smiled, bitter and tired. Honest, at least. The next morning, the town felt different. People moved quicker, eyes darting to alleys and doorways. Ash Hollow had smelled trouble before, but this time it was thicker, sharper, like iron before a storm. Sheriff Harlan Pike showed up at the saloon before noon, his belly straining against his vest, his mustache twitching with every word. Heard there was ruckus last night. Heard Rufus Brandt's men were sniffing around. Martha poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across to him. They sniffed. They left. Pike frowned, stirring the black liquid without drinking. They don't leave without reason. If Brandt's name is in it, it won't end with slammed doors. James Cutter, seated at the back, finally spoke. Maybe if the sheriff did his job, folks wouldn't have to defend themselves. Pike's eyes flicked to him, irritation simmering. You a lawman, mister? Not anymore. The sheriff grunted, unimpressed. He set the mug down and leaned toward Martha. Listen to me, widow. Whatever Kane was tangled in, it ain't yours to fix. Best thing you can do is pack up and head east. Let the desert swallow what's left. Martha shook her head slowly. This saloon is all I have. If the desert wants it, it'll have to come take it from me. The sheriff sighed, tugged at his vest and left, muttering that some folks didn't know when to quit. When the door closed, James gave a low chuckle. He's right about one thing. You're either stubborn or suicidal. Martha glanced at him, her lips tightening. Maybe both. By dusk, the saloon was crowded again. Not because anyone wanted whiskey, but because people wanted to see what would happen. It was as if Ash Hollow itself was holding its breath, waiting for the first spark. And the spark came. The doors burst open, and this time Rufus Brandt himself stepped inside. Tall, scarred, his smile pulled crooked by the mark across his lip. Two men flanked him, pistols at their sides. The piano stopped mid-note. Brandt's boots echoed as he crossed the floor, slow and deliberate. He stopped at the bar, leaned forward, and let his scarred smile spread. Widow Kane, you've got something that belongs to me. Martha's chest tightened, but her voice stayed level. I have nothing of yours. You've got Kane's ledger, his papers, his promises. Brandt's tone was sharp as a knife. You hand it over. Maybe this place still stands come morning. The room waited, every eye flicking between them. Martha felt the weight of James's presence behind her, steady, quiet. She thought of Kane's drawer, of the papers she'd hidden beneath floorboards just hours ago. She thought of how her husband had left her nothing but ruin, and yet here she stood, fighting to claim even that ruin as hers. She straightened her shoulders. Burn me down if you want, Brandt. But I'll tell you the same thing I told your dogs. I burned the ledger. Brandt's scarred smile twitched. He leaned closer, his breath hot with whiskey. You're braver than your husband ever was. He begged when the noose tightened. Martha's hand clenched against the counter. James Cutter stood now, chair scraping loud across the floor. His revolver wasn't drawn, but his hand hovered near enough. Careful, Brandt, he said, voice low. Some ghosts don't stay buried when you speak their names. Brandt glanced at him, then back to Martha. You've got yourself a new protector. Won't matter, he'll end the same as Kane. The room's tension coiled so tight it could snap. Brandt let the silence draw tight as a wire. Then he straightened and spoke to the room, not to Martha. Last time, folks, I'm collecting what Kane owed. The sooner we all admit it, the sooner we get back to music. No one laughed. The piano man stared at his hands. Martha reached beneath the counter, slow and deliberate. For a heartbeat, Brandt tensed, expecting a gun. What she said on the bar was a single folded sheet, edges singed. You're right about one thing, Brandt. Kane kept accounts. He kept them in a hand so tight and mean a banker would blush. I burned what tied me to him. I saved what ties you to him. A murmur stirred the room. Brandt's smile faltered. James Cutter shifted his weight, taking 2 easy steps until his shoulder barely brushed Martha's. He didn't touch the paper. He didn't have to. Martha opened the sheet. Her voice was even, cutting clean through the air. Payment rendered, 4 men at dusk, rear alley, collection from mule train, split agreed. Signers, R.B. She lifted her eyes. That's you, Rufus Brant. And this name beneath? Witness by S. Van. You know him. Most men who lose things in this territory do. Brant's jaw worked. You don't have proof that page is real. I have the burn on my floor where Kane hid the ledger, the ink on my hands, and a room full of witnesses, Martha replied. And if truth still needs walking, Sheriff Pike can walk it. As if summoned by his name, the door swung inward, and Pike stepped in, hat low, star bright. He took in the scene in one sweep. Brant framed by his men, Martha with the page, Cutter's hand hovering. The crowd pressed to the walls like wheat in wind. I heard enough standing outside, Pike said. Brant, you'll keep your hands where I can see them. Brant's eyes flashed, then cooled. Sheriff, you don't want this. Maybe I finally do, Pike answered, surprising even himself. Martha slid the page across the counter. Pike did not read it aloud. He only looked once, then tucked it into his vest. It says what I feared. It says you turned debt into theft and theft into fire. It says you dragged Ash Hollow into your pocket. Brant glanced at his men. They shifted, uncertain now that the room had turned into a witness stand. Paper and talk, he said. Kane's dead. You can pin anything on the dead. Then let the living answer, Cutter said softly. Something in his tone cracked the stillness. Brant's hand twitched toward his gun, half instinct, half habit. Cutter's revolver cleared leather, but he fired into the plank at Brant's boot, the shot slamming the room awake without drawing blood. The floorboard jumped. Sawdust lifted like breath. Brant froze, weight on his back heel. You'll hang for that. Not tonight, Cutter said. His muzzle didn't waver. For the first time since he entered, Brant measured the room and did not like the math. The blacksmith by the door with a length of iron. Oates the storekeep holding a shotgun he'd never before dared bring out. 3 ranch hands he'd shaken down last winter, all staring with the calm of men who have finally run out of fear. Pike stepped forward. You're under arrest, Rufus, for extortion and conspiracy to robbery. You come quiet, you go to Fort Kestrel in the morning. You pull iron, you won't see another dawn. Brant's mouth curled. You think a judge will choose a widow's word over mine? I think a judge will hear a town, Pike said. And a town's heavier than any man. Brant's gaze slid to Martha. Kane begged me the night he died. Begged me for the kind of mercy you don't have in you. Martha held his stare. Maybe I didn't then. I do now. You'll live to stand trial. For a breath the air trembled with the possibility that he might reach anyway, that he might force the room to bleed. Instead, Brant slowly lifted his hands, palms open, a gesture that looked like surrender until you saw the hatred bricked behind it. Pike moved in, quick for a big man, and took Brant's gun. One of Brant's hirelings made the mistake of lunging. Cutter stepped sideways, hooked a bar stool with his boot, and sent it skidding into the man's knees. The hireling crashed, breath knocked from him, rage stripped of its teeth. Enough, Pike said, voice carrying the weight he'd avoided for years. 2 townsmen, men who'd once kept heads down at every thunder of hooves, helped march Brant toward the door. The crowd parted and did not cheer. They did something harder. They watched, wide-eyed and quiet, and let the watching be a verdict. At the threshold, Brant twisted his head back. This won't hold. Paper burns. Men forget. Money remembers. Then we'll keep reading until your money runs out of ears, Martha said. They pushed him into the night. The saloon exhaled. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the piano man set his palms on the keys and let a single soft chord roll like a blanket over the room. Conversation rose. Careful at first, then warmer. Oates brought the sheriff coffee he didn't ask for. The blacksmith patted Martha's shoulder once, a nod that said more than words. Cutter holstered his gun and turned his chair upright again. You did it, he said. No, Martha answered, voice low. We did. You, Pike, the whole town. That's the point. He watched her as if seeing the saloon for the first time. the mirrors clouded by years, the nicked bar Kane had polished obsessively, the curtains Martha had mended in the hours no one paid for. What happens now? She looked around. The room had edges again, not ruins. Brant goes to Kestrel. The page goes with him. I write down what I remember from the ledger, not to keep, but to show. We open in the morning. We serve coffee before whiskey. We change the music at dusk. Little things. Things that last. Cutter's mouth twitched. You're stubborn, Martha Kane. I'm Martha, she corrected gently. Just Martha. He nodded, as if that mattered more than any victory. You want me gone before sunrise? She studied him, the scar along his jaw, the gun that had barked once to save 10 lives from spilling, the weariness that never asked for pity. I want a man at the door for 3 nights. After that, we'll see what fear has left behind. 3 nights I can do, he said. She poured 2 small measures and slid one to him. To the ledger that didn't burn fast enough, she said wryly. He touched his glass to hers, and to the page that did. They drank. Outside, boots thudded past as the sheriff's makeshift posse settled Brant in a cell that had not held anyone important in years. The desert wind rattled a shutter and carried the news farther than tomorrow's gossip would. Near midnight, Martha locked the front doors and doused the lamps until only one remained. Cutter set his chair by the entrance, hat low again, but she knew sleep would only find him in thin slices. She stood at the bar a moment, fingertips resting on the scarred wood. Then she crouched, pried up a loose plank, one Kane had used for secrets, and lifted out nothing. It was empty now by choice, not emptiness. She laid the plank back, squared it with the next, and dusted her palms. Good night, James, she said. Night, Martha. She climbed the stairs. Halfway up, she paused, listening, not for footsteps or threats, but for the sound the building made when it decided to keep standing. The saloon answered with a soft, settling creak, like a chest expanding after a held breath. Dawn cracked pale and clean. The town woke cautious, then curious, then relieved. Pike rode out with 2 men and a prisoner. Oates propped his door early and chalked a price on coffee that made sense to working hands. The blacksmith stoked his fire. Children dared the street again, their boots scribbling lines in dust. Martha unlatched the saloon's doors and swept the threshold. She set out 3 cups and a tin of biscuits she'd burned a little. When the first rider paused, hat in hand, uncertain if the place had survived the night or only remembered how to look like itself, she smiled. We're open, she said. He dismounted, tied off, stepped inside. Others followed. Music came later, when music felt like company, not noise. Cutter stood watch until the sun was 2 fingers high, then came in and took a seat near the window. He looked older in daylight, but also lighter, like a man who had put down a satchel he'd carried past the point of sense. You'll be moving on, Martha said, not quite asking. A day or 2, maybe 3. Long enough to make sure the page gets where it needs to. Long enough to see if Ash Hollow remembers what it did last night. Towns forget, she said. They also learn, he answered. The door swung again and a woman in a soot-gray dress stepped in, set a small bouquet of desert blooms in a glass, and left without a word. Martha stared at the flowers as if they were a letter she was learning to read. She placed them at the end of the bar where Kane's ledger had once lain like a stone. She looked at Cutter. You were right about one thing. Men did come for what Kane left behind. Turned out it wasn't gold. It was a debt of fear. We paid it off. Cutter considered, then nodded toward the piano. Play something brighter tonight. She laughed, surprised at the sound and how it filled the rafters. Tonight, then. Outside, the desert lifted its face to the sun and pretended it had not felt a knife of cold the day before. Inside, the widow of the saloon set her hands to the day's work, which felt for once like building instead of hiding. And somewhere on the road to Fort Kestrel, a man with a crooked smile discovered that money could keep a lot of things, but not a town that had finally decided it belonged to itself. By dusk, when the lamps were lit and the mirror held back a warmer room, Martha pressed the last cup into Cutter's hand and inclined her head to the door. 3 nights, she reminded. 3 nights, he agreed. He took his post beneath the sign whose paint was flaking, but whose name was new in the mouths of those who said it. Not Cain's, Martha's. And when the pianist's fingers found a melody that lifted without strain, and voices began to braid along its edges, the saloon did not feel like a room waiting for trouble. It felt like a promise kept.